a very common belief that being bigger means that you have more joint pain, and that is absolutely false.
Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Katie, and for those of you who don't know me, I used to weigh 360 pounds, and I've lost 180 pounds and kept it off for years now. And on this channel, we will discuss weight loss, weight maintenance, nonsense I see online about fat acceptance and body positivity, my experiences with all of that, and well, anything else I feel like talking about. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below, and let's get into today's video. So today I have a TikTok from another new friend to the channel, as they go by on TikTok, FatSapphicBro. And they're discussing the relationship between weight and hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And as somebody who does have diagnosed hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, I figure we can watch this together and I will give you my reactions along the way. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into it.
This person says, I involuntarily lost weight through the pandemic, and it's made my joints less stable. Heads.
Okay, so before we get into FatSapphicBro's response, I do question the wording of that. Involuntarily lost weight. I can only assume that this commenter must have meant unintentional weight loss, meaning they weren't trying to lose weight. Where if I hear involuntarily, I assume that like somebody is being detained and food is being withheld from them. So I hope for that commenter's sake that is not the case and that they really did mean unintentional weight loss. Because I know in fat acceptance they like to make a very clear distinction between unintentional and intentional weight loss. Basically, fat acceptance tries to thread the needle, so to speak, and say that as long as you're adopting healthy habits and you have no intention of losing weight, and the weight just happens to come off like a magical fairyland, then apparently that one is okay. But if you even have a notion in your mind that you would like to make changes and have an outcome from that, and that outcome be weight loss, nope, unacceptable. So I wonder if this commenter is using this wording to try to appease the gods of fat acceptance, but seeing that word definitely did strike me as odd. And then FatSapphicBro referred to hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome as heads, which I must say I've never heard a doctor or medical professional ever refer to it that way. Let me know if you've ever heard someone call it that, but I personally have not. So just got to say, when we're discussing these things, especially dealing with a condition that is on the rare side and a lot of people don't really know about or have awareness of, I feel like we should be using very clear, concise, direct wording. And I know if I told somebody that I had heads, they would look at me like I had exactly that, 2 heads. So believe me, I understand and have definitely done that when typing it out using the acronym. But when I hear doctors and people who have it refer to it, I've always heard it referred to as Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or EDS or hypermobile EDS, never heads. So that being said, what is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome? Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a genetic connective tissue disorder with 13 different subtypes, the most common being hypermobile, which is the one that I have, and that accounts for approximately about 80% of EDS patients. And the main component with all of them is that your body does not produce collagen properly. So what is collagen? Collagen is a family of proteins. I believe there's 22 that make up the family of collagen, and each molecule of collagen is going to be too large to pass through your cell membrane. So your body's going to take that collagen and break it down into components. Once it's broken down into components, those components can now pass freely through the cell membrane. And once it's inside, your body's going to piece those back together and reform the collagen. Now, the most current research that I could find, it does appear that it's the reformation process of the collagen within the cell that goes sideways. So it doesn't really matter how I acquire this collagen. If it's the collagen my body naturally produces, if I take supplements, or if I get it through dietary needs, it doesn't really matter how much collagen you give me, my body's always going to put it back together incorrectly. Basically, the way that I like to describe it to people, imagine you need a desk. So you're going to go to IKEA and buy yourself a box of furniture. You bring that box home, you open it up and find, hey, there's no instructions. So you start putting it together, and next thing you know, your body made a bookshelf instead of a desk. Lovely, but you really needed that desk. And it doesn't matter how many times you go and buy another box of furniture, you just keep getting more bookshelves and you never get the desk you truly need. So that's kind of what's going on behind the scenes. But what does collagen affect? Well, first and foremost, it's going to affect your connective tissue, your tendons, your ligaments, your cartilage. It's also going to affect your hair, your skin, your nails. It can affect your eyes, the enamel in your teeth, your circulatory system, the synapses in your brain, your spinal column, your bone marrow. Basically, collagen's found in like 90% of your body. So with the type that I have with hypermobile EDS, it's mostly going to affect my joints, but it has the potential to affect everything else that collagen affects. So it mostly is going to affect my joints, but there's a whole host of things that it can and does affect for me. So the number one symptom that EDS patients have reported over time is going to be joint pain, as well as joint laxity, which means my body is much more prone to sprains, strains, dislocations, and partial dislocations, also known as subluxations. And believe me, if you want to hear medical horror stories, I have plenty. My goodness. I destroyed my ankle just walking across the street. Had to relearn how to walk again. It was a whole mess. Actually, I made a video on that. I'll go ahead and link that down below. Let's see. I went to go shut my back door and dislocated this finger in not one, but 2 knuckles and reset it myself. Let's see. I dislocated my left shoulder in my sleep. Literally in my sleep. It popped all the way out of socket and my husband had to pop it back into socket for me. So very strange and sometimes incredibly debilitating injuries that can just happen from normal everyday activities. And then another big symptom that many of us with EDS have, I think it's in the 90 percentile, most of us have this, that's going to be issues with our skin. Not only do I have incredibly sensitive skin and have to be very careful about soaps, deodorants, perfumes, dyes, all of that, anything that goes on my skin, I have to be incredibly careful about, but also skin fragility, meaning it's very easy for me to cut and tear my skin. So I'm very prone to scarring. Every single time I've had stitches, they have gone sideways in my life. When I destroyed that ankle walking across the street, I ended up having surgery on that about 9 years ago. And even though it's been 9 years, that scar is red, it is raised, it is angry, it is sensitive, and that is about as good as it is going to get. I'm very prone to stretch marks. I've had issues with piercings in my life. Basically, the less I mess with my skin, the better. And then there are many other symptoms that go along with EDS. You may have GI and digestive issues. You may end up with neurological issues. You could have circulatory issues. There are so many symptoms that can fall under the umbrella of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So to sum up, EDS is a group of connective tissue disorders in which you'll likely experience joint pain, skin issues, and a whole host of other issues. That being said, it is a spectral disorder, meaning no one experiences EDS in quite the same way. So just things to keep in mind moving forward. And also, I would like to point out that May is also Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome Awareness Month, so I hope I am doing just at least my small part to help spread awareness to this. If you'd like any more information, I will list some links down below in the comments as well. And let's go ahead and see what FatSapphicBro has to say about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I have made videos about this before. When you have EDS or other hypermobility in your joints, it is actually better to be a little bit on the heavier side because it helps to stabilize your joints more. I have a lot.
Okay, so they are claiming it's better to be a little bit on the heavier side if you have hypermobile EDS. Now, this is one caveat that I have with that, and it is in the wording. A little bit heavier. What does that mean? Is that 5 pounds? Is that 10 pounds? Is that 50 pounds? Is that 100 pounds? Now, I know what that might mean to me, but I don't know how that might be interpreted by someone else who would hear that. So in that case, I think it would be very pertinent to make a very clear distinction on what they mean when they say a little bit heavier, so as not to cause any confusion with this, especially since we're dealing with a condition that not many people already know about to begin with. The last thing we need to do is muddy the waters. We need to speak clearly and directly about this condition when we are going to speak about it. So the other thing I'd like to point out as well is our joints aren't just made up of connective tissue and fat. There are other components to it as well. So obviously many joints have cartilage, and then there are your muscles that help support everything as well. So it's not just fat that help protect your joints. You also need to build strong muscles as well. I know every single instance of all those strange injuries I just told you about, I would get sent to physical therapy. And what would they do in physical therapy? Help me build up strength in that joint. You must build up the supporting muscles to help support your joints. And this is where physical therapy has been incredibly helpful for me and many people with EDS. But let's see what else they have to say about that.
I have a lot of friends diagnosed with EDS or other hypermobile conditions. I have some hypermobility in some of my joints as well.
Okay, so is this where we point out to them that there's a big difference between having a little bit of hypermobility and having enough for a criteria for a diagnosis, because it's way beyond just hypermobile joints. It's a condition that can affect every single system in your body. So it's not just hypermobile joints. And I just want to point out that just because they have friends that have it, that is a very different thing than actually living with it. Like, look, my grandpa on my mom's side, he was blind. And despite the fact that I was incredibly close with him and I was able to ask him anything, and I did ask him a lot of questions about his condition, I will never know what it's like to go through what he went through. I'm very glad that he was able to share that with me, but I can't speak for visually impaired or blind people just because my grandpa was blind. I can understand and I can empathize, but I will never speak over, ever, anyone that has the actual condition. And I guess maybe it's just rubbing me the wrong way because I do have this condition, and I wouldn't want somebody else to speak for me. They can raise awareness, they can tell people about it, but if they were trying to speak for me, I don't know, maybe that's just me, but that's a line that I just don't cross, nor would I want someone to cross for me. So let's continue.
And for a lot of my friends, they have directly been told by their doctors, do not lose weight. Try to stay a little bit heavier because it helps to stabilize your joints.
Okay, so here's the thing. Now I have a lot of questions because we don't have enough information to make any sort of conclusion based off of what we've just heard. We have no idea where their friends were actually starting. No clue what they were actually starting with. And one thing I already mentioned with EDS is you can very easily have GI and digestive issues. And so it is very common for EDS patients to kind of fall to one extreme or another on the weight spectrum. There are many EDS patients who aren't able to get enough nutrition and have to get feeding tubes or supplemental nutrition. So knowing that that is a part of this condition, I have a lot of questions because that seems like a blanket statement. Well, many of my friends were told not to lose weight because it's going to help with their joints. But joints aren't the only thing that are affected. This is an entire body condition that, yes, your joints are most likely going to be what you notice. But there's a lot that goes into it that is not just joints. And again, still no clarification on what a little bit on the heavier side actually means. Again, are we talking 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 20 pounds, 100 pounds? Maybe that's just me, but if somebody tells me those things, I'm going to need to know, what do you actually mean by that? Because that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I know when I was 360 pounds, if you would have told me that, I would have taken that as permission to stay the size that I was, despite knowing all of the health conditions I currently had. So, I don't know, maybe I'm just taking this far too literally, but again, I feel like we need to be very clear and direct when talking about these things, especially involving people's health. So, let's see what else they have to say.
It's a very common belief that being bigger means that you have more joint pain, and that is absolutely false. Now, does that...
Absolutely false, meaning there is no exception or wiggle room whatsoever? Really? I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. Especially when FatSapphicBro is not defining what they mean by bigger. Again, is that 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 100 pounds? Because I know being 180 pounds bigger than I am now, when I was 360 pounds, my joints definitely hurt far worse than they do now. Far worse. And my joints are in worse shape now because of osteoarthritis, bone spurs, all sorts of things that you develop from repeated injuries. I do have a fair amount of that in a lot of my joints. So despite the fact structurally my joints are worse, my joints feel a lot better now. I wonder what could have caused that. And do you know what the saddest part about that was? Not only was I in my mid-20s and should not have felt like that, but also I didn't really realize how badly I felt until I started feeling better. And that's the thing about it. Looking back now, not only can I very clearly see the difference, but I know what the difference feels like. Before, I had no reference point. I didn't know what it felt to not always be in pain. And once you're always in a low level of pain, it sometimes doesn't always register in people's brains. That's what chronic pain can do to people. I personally just don't buy that based off of my experience. Now, that being said, I know I do have EDS and my joints are already kind of, so I know that that does play a part in it. But I also know that the people that I hear say these things are often very young, usually in their early to mid 20s. And I don't hear too many people in their 30s, 40s, or 50s saying how great it is on their joints to be obese. I don't hear that at all. I mean, I'm 40 now, and I don't hear anyone in my age bracket saying that. So I just don't buy the idea that it's absolutely false.
Does that mean that every single heavy person will never have joint pain? No, there are some people that are going to have joint pain at a heavier size, but that does not mean that a blanket statement.
Okay, so did you notice they don't want us using blanket statements right after they got done using a bunch of blanket statements? That it's better to be heavier if you've got EDS, and that being heavier doesn't cause joint pain. Those sounded like blanket statements to me. So again, I'm not buying this, but let's see what else they have to say.
That being heavier is bad for your joints is correct. That's not a true statement.
But it is. Being heavier is bad for your joints. And if you don't believe me, physics will tell you all about that. At every step every one of us takes, we are putting pressure on all of our load-bearing joints. And if you don't believe me, let's check out the Arthritis Foundation. Being just 10 pounds overweight puts an extra 15 to 50 pounds of pressure on your knees. Just your knees. Those aren't all your load-bearing joints, but just your knees. And if that's not enough, it also states excess fat also acts to speed the destruction of cartilage. So they might not be having joint pain now, but they will. They will. Anyone who's ever lost cartilage will tell you bone on bone is incredibly painful. Believe me, I have bone on bone in my shoulder. It is not fun. You do not want to speed up the destruction of your cartilage in any fashion. So yes, we can definitively say that even 10 pounds overweight will put additional pressure on your knees. And with each additional 10 pounds over that, I mean, I can only imagine the amount of pressure that I was putting on my joints at 360 pounds. I know what it felt like, and it did not feel good.
For some people, yes, being heavier might affect their joints, but for a lot of us, being heavier does not harm our joints, and in fact, can be a protective factor for our joints. Thanks for adding to this.
So you know what the biggest protective factor you can have to your joints? Strong muscles. That's going to be the biggest protective factor you can ever have to any joint, is staying active and keeping your joints and your muscles as strong as you can. That is how you protect your joints. Let's again check out the Arthritis Foundation. And why am I referencing the Arthritis Foundation? Because the vast majority of us with EDS are going to end up with some type of osteoarthritis. So I know personally I have considerable arthritis in a good portion of my body. And I know that many people that have EDS also have osteoarthritis in their bodies. So I feel this is pretty pertinent information. So let's see what else they have to say. Extra pounds are hard on joints. The more you weigh, the more stressed and damaged your joints can become. For example, the knees of healthy weight people absorb about 1.5 pounds of force with every step. If you add osteoarthritis to the mix, with the joint misalignment that often goes with it, and if we're going to talk about joint misalignment, let's add EDS to that, your knees take even more of a beating. When you go up and down the stairs or squat to pick something up, the pressure increases dramatically. A lifetime of movement can take its toll, especially when you are overweight. And it continues on. Yet, if joint stress is the only cause of arthritis, then why is hand arthritis so common? There is a group of proteins that fat cells produce and release into your body, causing inflammation. Fat creates inflammation in addition to the excess stress it puts on your joints. For people with osteoarthritis, obesity is a 1-2 punch.
Second, head first slide, and another hustle double. Right over the bag at first. Now Hosey and Anderson square off. They're fighting. Down goes Anderson.
So fat isn't just padding or insulation or protection. It's also metabolically active, meaning your fat is producing hormones and putting them out in your bloodstream. And the heavier you are, the more hormones are getting pumped into your bloodstream by your fat. So that low-grade inflammation is not only going to cause pain, it's also going to break down the joints over time and cause a lot of other issues. Anyone with a chronic condition can tell you that inflammation is like the biggest thing that you've got to keep in control. If you can keep your inflammation under control, you're going to have a much better time with that condition, pretty much regardless what it is, because so much of it comes down to inflammation. So it's not just the pressure on your joints, it's the inflammation being caused by the proteins being put out by these hormones of your fat. All of these things combined. So that all being said, do I believe that it's better on your joints to be heavier with EDS? Well, it depends on how we define that. It really does. And that's why I had a lot of issues with this particular TikTok. There's no parameters whatsoever put on that. So personally, at my lightest, I got down to 145 pounds. I am 5'9", and that was right in the range of healthy weight for my height. And the other thing to keep in mind is I do have all of my loose skin still. It's everywhere. And doctors have estimated, I mean, it's a best guess, but they believe I have about 10 to 15 pounds of loose skin. So if you were to account for that loose skin, it actually put me right on the edge of being at a healthy weight for my height, and just on the edge of being a little thin for my height. So I did choose to put a bit of weight back on. I do have to say, as long as I'm within the healthy range or close, I prefer to be on the heavier side, but not for my joints. Not for my joints at all. Because I do have all of my loose skin, I actually have one of the complications that's pretty rare with EDS. Not only do you have connective tissue in your joints, but you also have connective tissue holding all of your internal organs together. So that was what I was noticing at my thinnest. I could literally feel my insides moving. And that is not a pleasant feeling. It is not a good feeling at all. Like 0 out of 10 cannot and will not recommend that to anyone. It is a very strange and weird feeling. So I did purposely put a little bit of weight back on. And now that I have done so, that did stop that. However, I did actually have a little bit of regain beyond that. I did get up to about 220 about 2 years ago and have since dropped that and maintained that ever since. And I can definitely tell you, once I got above about 180 and definitely on the way to 220, I could feel it in my joints. So it definitely affects your joints, especially when you have a condition that affects your joints. So, I mean, I guess on one hand, you could say I kind of do agree with our new friend here, but only with conditions and parameters that were not explained in that TikTok. As it was presented, I do not agree with our new friend here. Not even a little bit, because this is a very complex and nuanced condition. You can get 100 people with the same condition and have 100 different experiences, all still being EDS. So to that I say, please do not listen to people on TikTok for medical advice. Please don't listen to anyone on social media for medical advice. I will link good resources down below if anyone has any further questions. And if anything that I have said today resonates with you, please contact your doctor. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to keep asking until you do get an answer. So that is where we will leave things today. I thank you so much for joining me. Please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye. Look who I found sitting right outside the studio waiting for me. Is it Pokey? Oh, I guess it's dinner time. She's hooked on me. I'm not even doing, like, my actual skin. Hey, man. Oh my gosh, she really was hooked. To be fair, I had it coming. She's a good girl still, but I had it coming. Oh, well. Bye.